Okay, welcome back. Now with us is Meister from netzpolitik.org, and we will talk about our favorite kind of malware, the state-sponsored malware. Enjoy.
So, welcome to my talk titled State Malware or Government Malware. There's many types of definitions. Subtitle When Cops Play Hackers. Short, who am I? I am a journalist from Berlin, Germany. I'm writing for digital rights online media Netzpolitik. We've existed for, 17 years now. We kind of got famous in 2015 when the Secret Service tried to investigate us for treason and filed criminal charges against us. But it's not just Marcus, the founder, and me. By now we're 17 people doing digital rights journalism for free, as in free beer, and free as in free speech. All of our content is on a Creative Commons license, full open source, and our financing is absolutely based on voluntary user donations. I have personally followed state malware for quite some time, and I can talk about this topic for hours, so please find me after at the bar to keep this discussion going. Yeah, it's a huge field. The conference organizers gave me a few keywords which they wanted me to go into, but each of these keywords I can also talk at length, so I hope we have time for Q&A and later peer-to-peer networking. So there are many types of government hacking out there. Most are attacking encryption. This is actually from a video of a German state entity, encrypted crime. I'll get to why that's probably not needed and dangerous in most cases. So there are many types of government attacks on encryption and government malware. The classic case is backdoors. I don't know who of you remembers the first crypto wars in the 90s? Anyone know what this is? Okay, this is a so-called Clipper chip. Might ring a bell with a few of you. Back in the 90s, there was the first big public debate about how far should encryption go, who should have the right to encrypt all of their data communication, and should governments have access to those encrypted communications, and if so, in which form? Back then in the 90s was a different time. Things like TLS were only being developed for the first time, PGP, but immediately the government started, yeah, it's nice that you have all this encryption, but we still want to decrypt everything. How can we do that? And one proposal was so-called key escrow. Yeah, you can do encryption, but we want a copy of your private key. Please, if you provide encryption products for the world, use our chips. So obviously we have a copy of the private key, which it's a failed attempt, even in the US. The Clipper chip had died, but the backdoor debate has never really completely gone away. This is NSA Chief Michael Rogers. He still insists that the government needs to be able to decrypt everything, but he is kind of aware that backdoor is a bad term, especially for governments. So I now have some new wordings. He actually said, quote, I don't want a backdoor, I want a front door. But no matter if you call it a backdoor, a front door, or a side door, that's just semantics. Either the government can read in or it cannot. It doesn't matter what term you use for that. Now, this is the fundamental problem because you can't really fight with math and physics. So encryption is either solid or it's broken. You can't protect only against the bad guys and keep those out, definitely, but not protect against the good guys and let the good guys have a backdoor anyway to attack your encryption. Now, this is obviously highly dependent on what you define as an attacker, but it's a binary problem. It's little black hat, white hat. Encryption methods are either solid or they are broken. It's a little like Schrödinger's encryption. You can't both have solid encryption that protects against all the adversaries out there, criminals, the Chinese, whatever the newsroom of the day is, but it is not broken for the good guys, the German or the Austrian police or whoever is in your social circles is defined as bad or good. Now, not all politicians have gotten that into their head and understand the fundamental problem of you can't really fight math, and they keep coming up with the front door metaphor or other sayings like that. Well, you tech guys, you make it sound so binary, but then you haven't thought about it enough. You need to, quote, nerd harder, is what they tell us. So you have to somehow solve this problem that everyone should encrypt, but the police and the state wants to be able to decrypt everything. Now, there's a second type of attacks on encryption, which are legal attacks on encryption, and there's also a big, there are many subtypes of this. Now, you might remember this guy. Starting in 5 years ago, the UK passed the so-called Investigatory Powers Act, which is now in force. He actually looked better than Theresa May, who thought it up back then. But to quote Wikipedia, this law requires communication service providers in the UK to have the ability to remove encryption, which it applies. So here's a law that says, use encryption, but if we ask you, you have to be able to decrypt that. Now, this is obviously the fundamental problem we're talking about, but it is now enshrined in law in the UK, but as far as I know, it hasn't been tested out in court yet of what that means in specific circumstances, which has stopped other people to say that's a good idea, we want to have the same thing. This is the Australian Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. Australia has modeled a similar law, the Assistance and Access Act, after the UK IPA, which was proposed 3 years ago and is still ongoing, but it looks like it'll be passed, although there's a big public debate, which is good, I guess. You also know this guy doing something with computers, I don't know what. But in the US, last year proposed the so-called Earn IT Act, which tries to do something similar. Please use only encryption you want, but you have to be able to provide us with the clear text. Now, this is currently in a proposed stage. It is in Congress being debated. It is not passed yet because it's a hard nut to crack. But it doesn't stop at the 5 countries. We're here in Europe and the European Union. This is the European Council, which is the heads of state and governments, and they adopted a paper just last year, which has now become infamous for its title. They want security through encryption and security despite encryption. Now, again, they go through lengths for some pages to say everyone needs encryption because you can't have an internet without encryption. We don't have online banking, e-commerce, or anything really. But law enforcement still need access. The wording they use is we need to somehow strike the right balance without defining what that actually means. Now, they produce a video too, but I think I'll skip that for now, and if we get bored at the Q&A, I can present that later. Now, third type of attacks on encryption are side channel attacks, or, well, probably not classic cryptanalysis side channel attacks, but trying to take the side door, a side approach. A typical example of this is Apple's feature, which they published just in August, called client-side scanning. They proposed this method for child safety. iMessage and many other messaging apps are encrypted iPhones even have device encryption for data at rest. But how about we encrypt the communications end to end, but before we send it or after we receive it, we run a filter through it and analyze it and scan it and detect child abuse material or later missing children, terrorist offenses, the typical problem. Now, they got a lot of backlash for that. They probably thought up one of the least bad ways of doing it, but it's still bad to do it. And Apple listened, and they postponed their proposal indefinitely after feedback. But yeah, it helped to have this paper. I don't know who of you has seen this paper, but this is pretty awesome. It's a paper just from 2 months ago. The list of authors reads like a library of InfoSec standard words. I mean, you got Diffie, Russ Anderson, you get Bruce Schneier, you got Ron Rivers, the R and RSA, almost everyone of these is pretty famous, and they bashed Apple's proposal of client-side scanning and similar proposals for a myriad of reasons, for the depth of the intrusion, for problems with error margins. If you scan for child abuse images, you don't want a false positive or a false negative because you want to find all the abusers. But then again, you don't want to send innocent people to the police, because this is the next thing. The EU proposals, the political proposals, like scan all the content before and after it's encrypted, but if you find incriminating material like child sex abuse material, immediately send that to the police, because in a digital world that's now possible, even though that's probably not a good idea. This is the last, this was actually just last week. In the European Union has been trying to Apple proposed to make that mandatory. So there's this thing called the e-privacy regulation, which says we need privacy online, which means it's illegal to do client-side scanning for encrypted private content. And then when that was passed into law, they said, oh shit, well, we've actually been scanning all kinds of data, be it Facebook scanning all kinds of messages on Facebook Messenger or their public social network, cloud providers like Apple, Microsoft, scanning what people upload to their clouds. So they changed that. They said, oh, sorry, we briefly made that illegal. Now we changed the law again to allow you to do that, but the next step, just last week, will to make that mandatory, to have client-side scanning mandatory. It's currently a big political struggle. Just last week, the EU had a conference on child sexual abuse material where they agreed on and published a joint statement, again saying, encrypt all you want, but we want access to your clear text and automatically analyze it, and in case we find something illegal, send it to the police. This is a member of European Parliament from Germany called Patrick Breyer, and he's really active on the European Union level of fighting against this. Now this is the only slide where I actually put some text on because his domain got lots of material on the ongoing political struggle. Now, on to offensive hacking. Sorry, I have very few bad hacker stock photos, but this is actually an original from the German army, so it's not mine. They use it themselves for advertising. States also try to do offensive hacking in various forms. Now, I'm talking to an InfoSec crowd. I don't need to explain to this audience the significance of that. So they basically want remote access, remote penetration of devices. They want remote code execution, persistence, privilege escalation. They basically want full access to all kinds of devices, whether it be smartphones, laptops, routers, servers, anything digital, and want to be able to analyze it and exfiltrate any data that's on those devices use access credentials on those devices to log on to different services and use the sensors built into these devices, like microphones, cameras, movement detectors, GPS. So basically full compromise. This is an advertisement of a German company, Fisher, proudly boasting how they do get remote access for their products. Now, which government entities do offensive state hacking? Obviously, foreign spy agencies. I'm sure most of you remember Edward Snowden and the NSA. Now, we could talk for entire conferences about the revelations of the Snowden leaks and what foreign spy agencies are doing in terms of surveillance, in terms of mass surveillance, in terms of offensive hacking. Actually, there have been entire conferences on this, so I'll keep this really brief and just mention it here. That just is basically, they try to own everything, and they're pretty damn good at it. They got all the resources, smart heads, And incidentally, the Snowden revelations have led to more encryption for user communications. I mean, who would have thought that Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp will become end-to-end encrypted by default? It weren't for the NSA, only because of the Snowden revelations. They have made those changes. I mean, HTTP is dying, finally. So that's a good thing, but then again, they're not happy with that. Second state actor hacking offensively are militaries. Now, that's not too new either. There's been electronic warfare since the 70s, 80s. The new buzzword is just cyber war. It's also hard to get into that because it's hard to publicly know what they're doing. And since I put cops in the title, I'll focus on some other actors, but many military around the world are pretty damn well-funded and good at offensive hacking. We don't only have to look to Stuxnet in Israel. I mean, the German military has hacked entire mobile phone networks in Afghanistan during the war. So they're not only want just single devices. Who remembers the NSA and I think JCHQ hacked Belgacom, the Belgish telecoms mobile communication operator. So yeah, there's lots of government hacking on the military side, and unfortunately very few details and public accountability. We have domestic spy agencies. These are not the guys doing signals intelligence, but doing domestic spying on what they claim to be terrorists, although in many democratic EU countries like Germany, fighting terrorists is actually a job for cops, police, not for the secret services. And they also spy on other spies, they do counter-spying, and on political movements, be it Islamist, right-wing, or even left-wing. I mean, they've been found to spy on climate activists. Who knows, next year they might hack climate activists' smartphones. And cops. Lots of police agencies around the world are more and more getting into offensive hacking. This is actually a real advertisement from the German police saying, have you ever kicked in a back door? So they're pretty open about it. Obviously, they're public saying the way they, forgetting the English term, they always publicly argue, yeah, we need this to fight terrorism and criminals, but we have yet to have a single case of terrorism which was not foiled due to missing competences of hacking, or all of the terrorist attacks we've seen in the last years were through a myriad of other errors, human errors, but not for lack of skills of offensive hacking. And the criminals they catch, we had some statistics from internal police data and public justice department data. It's mostly about drugs. So it's not like the murder, terror, which probably is also targeted, but yeah, as most methods of police, of surveillance capabilities, they're mostly applied to property, to money, crime, and drugs, because that's a big part of crime. Now, there's a special kind of government agency that doesn't do offensive capabilities themselves, but they actively support it. This is the German so-called Central Office for IT in the security sector. Really, they frame themselves as Cyber Agency 4.0. I don't know, it's enough to have either Cyber or 4.0 to be ridiculous, but having two in there, it's kind of weird. Their definition is to do digital forensics, communication surveillance, cryptanalysis, and big data analysis. And for that, they do market research. They try to find existing products out there and buy them. But they also do research and development. They have in-house teams of nerds trying to find vulnerabilities and write exploits for various devices. Unfortunately, I mean, apart from plausibly thinking about that they are obviously trying to target what everyone uses, but there's no official public data on which devices they're most actively working on to crack. Now, these were the state actors, and now there's a myriad of private companies in this field. This is just the sponsor list. This is actually just from the two first levels of sponsors. There's another range of sponsors for the ISS World Conference. It used to be called the Wiretappers. It'll be in Prague in a couple of weeks. And I just grabbed this straight from their website. And most of these companies do offensive hacking. Oh yeah, this conference is exclusive for state actors, so you have to be either police or military or a spy agency to even get in, and it's packed with people from all over the world. So yeah, there's many companies. Unfortunately, we'll never know all, but this is just a big public list that the industry has given us themselves. Now, you might remember this company, Hacking Team, was an Italian company. They were pretty early in this. They started in 2003 to develop, so their product was called RCS, Remote Control System. Basically get remote code execution on e-device and exfiltrate any data on there. They had customers across the world, but they had also a lot of problems. And 2 years ago, they were finally sold, and Hacking doesn't now no longer exist in its original form. We have Finfisher. That's a group of companies mostly around Germany. They also have an international network, like many of those. They're headquartered in Munich, which is also where their development is done. And this is an internal slide. Sorry for the quality. I got this in the mail many years ago, and it was in this quality already. They have developed a product suite, Finfisher, FinSpy, FinUSB, FinTrusion, FinFly, lots of Fin names from SharkFin. Since they're a German company and one of the only and big German companies in this field, I kind of took it to my responsibility to follow them really closely, because being German, that's where I feel I can spend my energy best. They also have customers across the world, many dozen countries. One thing Hacking Team wasn't, but the other free companies do. Germany, is this big democratic country in the middle of Europe, also bought their products, and I'll get to why that's problematic. Now, I'm sure you've heard of NSO Group. They're pretty famous recently, from Israel, founded in founded 2010, 11 years ago. Their flagship product is Pegasus, which mostly targets smartphones, but I'm sure it also can target other devices. I'm sure you did not miss the Pegasus project revelations, this investigative reporting from many media outlets. I'll get into the results a little later, but it actually produced lots of results, countries canceling their contracts, NSO being sued, NSA being sanctioned until that, and I think they're trying to continue to have customers across the world. NSO famously claimed they have block lists, that they have lists of target identifiers which their customers cannot target, like you cannot target targets in the US, in the EU, or in Israel, which funnily enough just last week was found to be bullshit because they sold to some actor who targeted phone numbers that had Israeli phone numbers. And as Finn Fisher, Germany also bought NSO Pegasus. Now this company is not one of the big three, Kangaroo. This is unfortunately the only picture that's available. The logo is on the left there. This is from a catering company at one of their company parties, which posted this picture on Facebook. It's hard to get in there and take pictures. Kangaroo is the name for an infamous fish in the Brazilian Amazon. It's called the penis fish, which is exactly why they chose this allegory, because apparently they're so sneaky, they get in everywhere and they can get stuck. So in contrast to the other companies I named, Hacking Team, Finn Fisher, NSO, Kangaroo is mostly focused on exploiting desktop devices, mostly Windows, but also servers, Linux. They also have customers around the world. A couple of years ago, they were revealed in a lawsuit to have proposals and ongoing business proposals with customers in 60 countries. Publicly proven so far have been around a handful, but they've only appeared on the radar this year when I think Microsoft and Google found them and researched on them. And again, Germany likely also bought their product. Now this has a myriad of problems. State hacking, state malware. The number one biggest problem with that is you can't damage IT security to gain public security. They're all advocating for, we need this, it's for security, it's for public security, how else are we gonna catch the bad guys? But no one is ever acknowledging that they're lowering the bar for IT security for everyone. A vulnerability cannot exist only for the German federal or even local police. It's either open and present, or it's closed for everyone. I mean, I'm at an InfoSec conference. I don't have to explain to you the significance of a zero-day exploit, but the state's obligation should be to fix zero-day vulnerabilities for everyone and not exploit them, even for their own good. I mean, how can you possibly justify that keeping some iPhone vuln open to catch Joe average drug dealer, but then again you have Merkel and Macron, which use the same fucking iPhones, and they get exploited by, as we've seen from Pegasus. So this example, I'm sure ring a bell for many of you, was WannaCry ransomware 3 years ago, I think. They were famous for using the Eternal Blue exploit on Windows, which the NSA found many years earlier and had stashed away, never told Microsoft or anyone else about it. At some point they lost it. Microsoft at one point patched it, and all the ransomware mayhem was actually done after the patch. But this doesn't weaken the argument that if a state, a nation state, has found a vulnerability, it has to close it. It has to work on notifying the vendor on getting that shit fixed for everyone. I mean, in Germany, trains and planes didn't work because the NSA didn't share their knowledge. Now, this is even enshrined in law in some countries. In Germany, we have a ruling by the top court which state that there's a fundamental right to guarantee confidentiality and integrity of IT systems. So not only does the state have a hard time to intrude into the confidentiality and integrity of IT systems of their targets, but they actually have an obligation to guarantee the security premises. Problem number 2 is we live in a global world. There are 193 sovereign states. How can you justify that only your national perspective matters? How can you give your national police an exploit and keep that open for all the 192 other countries and their spy agencies? What do you think a German police can find an ODA that the Chinese Secret Service can't? I mean, no, that's not how this works in a global world. If we allow everyone to go wild and abuse zero-day walls, I mean, it's a race to the bottom in the world. What we instead need is something like a digital non-proliferation treaty. Unfortunately, it took Hiroshima and Nagasaki to have a nuclear proliferation treaty. Hopefully, we don't have to come to that to get a digital non-proliferation treaty. Also, it's not necessary. Many advocates from states argue they're going dark because there's encryption everywhere. They have less visibility. They can't catch communication of criminals on there. It's just not true. Maybe they are losing a tiny part of what they were able to see in classic telephone networks when they were insecure. I mean, they're also complaining about 5G having end-to-end encryption, but that completely misses that during that, while some parts are getting encrypted, we are sharing so much data, we're producing so much data like never before. I mean, every one of us probably has at least one of these tracking devices selling a mobile communication network, our whereabouts all the time. We're producing so much, all of our lives are online. All of this data is actually accessible to law enforcement. So they're drowning in data. They have as much data as never before. So it's just not necessary to hack encrypted communication, and it's not proportionate, especially if we see examples that they're mostly using it for drugs and if we count in the collateral damage. Now, problem 4 is obviously privacy. As opposed to a classic raid in your home, when that happens, you know the cops bust in your door and you get the right to call a lawyer. With government intrusion into your devices, you don't know about that. You can't tell your lawyer. So this is way more significant. Also, IT is everywhere. They're only talking about smartphones because that's the current thing. But I mean, anyone knows that IT is all around us. I mean, many of us probably came here in computers that fly through the air where we sit in. Others have computers which drive on the road. Some of us are implementing medical devices, IT devices, into our bodies. So if we open this Pandora's box of states being able to hack everything, we got a huge problem in the years ahead. Problem number 5 is fundamental rights. After World War II, the international nations agreed on a Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and now I have to find a single human right that stealth government hacking does not infringe on. It infringes on the right to privacy, it infringes on the right to freedom of thought, on the right to freedom of religion, on the right to freedom of expression, on the right to freedom of association, on the right for peaceful assembly, on the right for freedom of movement, on the right of liberty, and the right to due process of law. So this is a huge. These tools are huge legal problems, and we have examples of human rights violations. This is Ahmed Mansour, a blogger from the United Arab Emirates, and a human rights activist. He really must have pissed off UAE's leader because they used all three big free state government malware on him: Hacking Team, Finfisher, and NSO. They burned millions of ODAs to get into the phones of these guys. Needless to say, he's been in prison again for 4 years. Human rights example number 2. Many of you might probably know this picture of Jamal Khashoggi, a Saudi journalist and columnist for the Washington Post who was assassinated in an embassy and actually hacked to pieces. His partner, his close confidants and family are alleged to have been hacked by NSO, which the company obviously denies. But many people watching his case closely think that the Saudi government has had access to the communications he had with other people because he used Pegasus. Now, the Pegasus Project investigation, I've mentioned it, it came out in July. It found a myriad of human rights abuses in 24 countries. They revealed that 24 heads of state were targeted with Pegasus, almost 200 journalists, many human rights defenders around the world, political opponents, lawyers, diplomats. NSO claims their tools are only to be used against criminals and terrorists. But who's a criminal and terrorist depends on who you ask. There's the saying, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And I'm sure for the Saudi Crown Prince, journalist Jamal Khashoggi is a criminal or terrorist. So we can't let him get away with these human rights violations. Problem number 6, there are a bunch of legal problems. One of it coming up for these companies in the last couple of years. I actually, with a couple of other NGOs, filed a legal complaint, a criminal complaint against Finfisher 2 years ago. Their tool was found in Turkey, but they hadn't applied for an export license to Turkey, which they needed. And more than expected, actually, the German prosecutors took it seriously, and they raided the Finfisher office in Munich. They raided 15 premises last year in Munich and Romania to find out whether these companies in their international dodgy shell company networks actually evaded export regulations. And there are no criminal consequences. Just last week, Mexico arrested a subcontractor of NSO Pegasus who was reselling and helping various government agencies to spy on journalists and others. Now, this is, of course, El Chapo, not the arrested person, funnily enough, and El Chapo is also alleged to have bought NSO Pegasus. Now, what can we do about it? There's lots of legal ways to get active. I've mentioned human rights activists and NGOs starting legal cases against these companies and state uses. These are Bahraini activists who filed the first court case against Finfisher that I came across in 2014. Mexican NGOs have filed criminal complaints against the companies, and their country. This guy is taking legal action. Zuckerberg is suing NSO Pegasus because they used WhatsApp for zero-click, for distributing their zero-click malware in big Pegasus cases, and Facebook is suing NSO for violating their terms of service. I mean, who'd have thought I'd be on Facebook's side for once? What else can we do? I mean, we live in nation states. We live in politics are not done by someone else. They're done by elected representatives, and we can get our voice out and we can get heard. We can stress our governments to listen to IT professionals, to not buy these products, to not use these products, and if they find vulnerabilities, to close them. That needs a lot of political work, but it is being done. States can also import export controls. Some of you might know the Wassenaar Arrangement from the post-Cold War era. This is a treaty to regulate so-called dual-use goods in the world. It was amended in 2013 to also cover intrusion software. There were lots of ambiguities about it. There was dodgy wording. People thought that maybe my Metasploit, my Nessus, my Nmap might also fall under that, but we've come a long way since, and the current legal definitions are actually pretty solid. Just this year in June, the European Union reformed its dual-use regulations to also cover cyber surveillance items. Now, if companies in Europe work on these products and or export them, they need a license, they need to export for a license, and they need some due diligence to know your customer, to basically say that this will not be used for human rights violations or you are responsible. Also, just last week or 2 weeks ago, the US imposed sanctions on NSO and Kangaroo. I will quote because it sums up the situation pretty nicely. So this is the US Commerce Department. NSO Group and Kangaroo were added to the entity list based on evidence that these entities developed and supplied spyware to foreign governments that use these tools to maliciously target government officials, journalists, business people, activists, academics, and embassy workers. These tools have also enabled foreign governments to conduct transnational repression, which is a practice of authoritarian governments targeting dissidents, journalists, and activists outside of their sovereign borders to silence dissent. Such practices threaten the rules-based international orders. Now, funnily enough, after praising Facebook, I'm now praising the US government, which is really weird, but they've done the right thing. What you can also do, remember your hacker ethics. If you need a little refresher, there's talks and CCC events up online, but do not work for those companies and do not let your friends work for those kinds of companies. Another form of activism is hacktivism. This was infamous hacktivist Phineas Fisher, who actually hacked FinFisher in 2014 and Hacking Team in 2015. Now, that brought us a lot of internal documents and revelations on their workings and on their illegal doings, but I can't advocate for doing that since that would be illegal. What you can do, point 8, research and defend. Do your malware analysis. Research the target countries, research their samples, research their methods. I mean, we're an InfoSec community. Analyze these tools you see out there in the wild, exploiting others, share with the community. All the big IT security companies have published work on the companies I have named, and I urge you to do the same. After all, government malware is malware. That's the stance everyone of the big IT security companies state, and that I agree with. If it is software that is against user consent, exfiltrating user data, it's malware, plain and simple, no matter who produced it and who uses it. Expose their doings, block them in their products. Just yesterday, I got a domain registrar to take down some of their domains from an ESET report, cut their infrastructure. Because after all, spyware, and coming from another pandemic, no one is safe until everyone is safe. Without further ado, that sums up my talk. I'd love to talk to you. We unfortunately have little time, but I will be around for the conference today and tomorrow and for peer-to-peer networking. This is my OpenPGP key in machine-readable form, since no one would scribble down notes anyway. Thank you very much.
So, where are the questions?
Thank you. So, as I see it, organized crime is using IT, terrorists are using IT. How should law enforcement or military tackle these threats? Should they stop using all kind of offensive measures to tackle these threats? Or what's your alternative?
Yeah, they should stop using offensive measures because everything else in their toolbox works. I mean, you might recall that everyone is saying, oh, darknet marketplaces, really bad, we can't control them, lawlessness. Every other week, Europol is taking down another darknet market. It is possible, even without offensive methods. Criminals are people, criminals make mistakes. Do solid police investigations, and you will find your criminals. You don't need offensive measures. It might look easier if you only think from the how can I catch bad guys side, but it is in most cases not necessary. It's never been publicly proven to be necessary. If you ask them, they only ever say, it would have been helpful in this case. Without proving that having used it in this case, they would have gotten a conviction, or without proving that there was no other way to stop that case. And I mean, I live in Germany. The crime rate has gone down. The rate of crime solved has gone up. Even though we live in a digital world, even solving crime in the digital sphere is going up. So it's not like this lawless place and we don't have any means to fight it out there. You just have to be smart about it, and you have to think about the collateral damage, which they are not doing.
So, more questions? So, then one question from my side. What's your take on the thing that the Australian police, Europol, and some other people did together, where they made the secret messenger and gave them out to people to pay and to catch some drug-selling people?
That's actually pretty smart. I mean, you don't have to crack someone else's messenger. I mean, who else would be comfortable with police agencies finding ODAs in Signal or whatever communications we use and not share that? But yeah, that's police tactics. Be smart about it. I mean, if you get a criminal to use your backdoor thing, I mean, that's not a very smart criminal. Sure, go get him.
You don't see this as an offensive effort?
No,
because that's very offensive.
I don't perceive that as actively using ODAs to infiltrate someone else's device without their consent. The targets consensually install their software, and they don't need an ODA for that.
So, more questions?
So if you apply the American gun argument to this, if you make encryption, if you break legal encryption, only criminals will have good encryption. Does it make sense to argue with the government with arguments like that? Like today, does it make sense to I don't have the thought form, sorry.
I would agree, and that is still true, the saying from the 90s. If encryption is outlawed, only outlaws will have encryption. Was true in the 90s, and it is true today. So we need encryption for everyone. I mean, the internet wouldn't work without encryption. No one could do any kind of commerce, of online banking, of personal information going through the internet if it weren't for encryption. Everyone needs encryption. And we've moved a little past because now they agree that everyone needs encryption, but they still want to break it. In the 90s, they just said, we don't want you to encrypt anything.
So, thank you very much. I think we have no more time because the next speaker is there in Zoom. If you have further questions, just reach out to Andre or you have his PGPiki.
I'll be around. Come find me. Thank you.